Here are the solutions to the exercises from Chapter 9. We'll start with printint.c, just to create a little macro that prints out the value of any given integer. So here is the macro right here. You'll notice that it's just a printf, a regular printf as you would expect. And notice that the name of the identifier that I'm printing out is just A. Now it's A here and it's A here. They do actually have to be the same. Whatever I specify inside the brackets there has to be the same there, but it doesn't have to be anything in particular. I've chosen A here, but I could have chosen X, or I could have chosen banana. It really doesn't matter. You do not have to create your identifiers in macros that are the same name as your variables down here. I've called this variable X, but I could just as easily call this Fred, as long as I made sure that I called that Fred as well. Now that will work just as well. Another interesting thing to note about this is that there is no semicolon on the end. I do never ever put a semicolon on the end of a macro. You can get away with it occasionally. If I had a semicolon there, this program would actually compile and run without any errors, but there would be many instances when I would not be able to get away with that. So as a golden rule, make sure you never put a semicolon there unless you know exactly what you're doing. It would have been perfectly okay for me to put something like this: the value of the integer is such and such, like that, with a new line on the end, and then I wouldn't need that line and I wouldn't need that line, and I could just do it like that. You might have done something like that, but I chose not to. I wanted to make my little macro as simple as possible. Okay, so that's the solution to that one. Now let's go and have a look at the course module. Here's my solution to the course project, database.c. Now notice that I have created something called database.h. That's the first thing to have a look at. Let's go and have a look at that now. Database.h has been created just for this particular solution, and it contains these lines. We have one hash define that defines the number of CDs that we're going to be using in our project, and I've said, well, how about 100 of them? That seems like a reasonable maximum. I've got two more. I've got one for the title size and one for the artist size. Now these both happen to be 60. There's no reason that they should both be the same. I could make one of them 50 or whatever number I like, but there's nothing really that in our specification for this project that says the title size must be the same as the artist size, so that's why I actually use two separate hash defines. Now I might want to put a little note to myself here that says this is not including the null character. That might make it a little more helpful to whoever is reading this file. So now we can go back to database.c and see where these three have been used. Now clearly they're going to be used in the definitions of the variables. Here I've got the number of CDs defined many times, so I've replaced all the 100s with the hash define no CDs, and there it is. And then I've also used the title size and the artist size there. Notice that I've also put a +1 in there to account for the null character. That obviously doesn't need to be commented, because any programmer who sees the +1 there will know exactly what it's for. Now before we have a look at this line here and this line here, let's just go through the program and see if there are any other instances of where we've used those three hash defines. Well, notice that I don't need to change that. That's working perfectly okay. I don't need to change those to make reference to the hash defines. And scrolling through, and still going. Okay, so here's an instance where we are referring to it. If we've reached the maximum number of CDs, then we put out a little message to tell them that and break out of the loop. And that's, I think, the only time that we ever use those outside of the variable declarations. So now let's get back to this line here. This line is telling us that this line, this variable declaration, will only be compiled into the program if the hash define called noArtist has not been defined. It's a bit of a double negative here. I have I asked for a flag called noArtist. Now if that flag is not defined, then I do need to specify the artist information. So in other words, if ndef, if no definition of noArtist, could be read as if, say, artist is defined. Now we don't have a hash defined called artist, but if we did, that might be how we would read that. So that does get a little confusing, but that's very common in C, so get used to it. So we can basically say if they're not asking for no artist, then we will indeed put something about the artist in there. And scrolling on down, we get the same sort of behavior here. If they've not specified that there's not going to be an artist, then we put all the details about whether the artist name should be asked for. And scrolling further on down, I think there was another instance. Yes, we obviously print the artist details under the same circumstances. And that's all. So let's now run this, and this should be the artist version. It'll be the artist version because I have not defined anywhere that no artist is to be used. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So let's run the program, compiles and runs. Notice that I'm accurately saying there's going to be 100 CDs, so let's just type in some dummy details. Aha! We are getting a question about the artist, which is what I expected. So and there we go, and I'll say no, and it accurately displays the artist information there. And now I exit the program. Now back in the source code, if I ever wanted to specify that I did not want any artist information to be specified at all, then this is how I would do it. I would say hash define no artist. This hash define causes this line to turn up a value of false. This line is looking to see if no artist is or is not defined, and now it is defined. So this if ndef means if it is not defined, then declare this variable. Now it is defined, so we're not going to declare the variable. I hope that makes sense. It is that double negative thing happening again. So I will now recompile the program, and now it should be a no artist version of the program because I've defined no artist to be true. So let's run it, and now I should get no artist information required or printed. And the title, aha, there we go. It did not prompt me for the artist. So let's have a look at that. Any more CDs to enter? No. And again, it did not display the artist either. So as you can see, our little test is working. Now a couple of things to notice about this particular flag here. Notice that I don't actually have to set no artist to be defined to be anything. I don't have to say no artist is equal to 100. I don't have to set no artist to be equal to 1. I don't have to set it to be true. In fact, I don't have to set it to be anything, because all I'm doing here is checking whether it is defined or not, and here it is defined. It's not defined to be anything, but it is still defined. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Also, we are ultimately going to be developing this database application across several .c files. It's all in one .c file at the moment called database.c, but at some point there's going to be several .c files, and each one of them is going to require access to this particular hash define to know whether it's turned on or whether it's turned off. Now what I don't want to have to do is open up every single .c file and add this line or delete this line depending on whether I do or don't want artists involved in my program. I'd like to do it in one spot and one spot only. Can you think about where that one spot might be? Yes, well, I hope you guessed that it is supposed to go into database.h. So the real place where this should go, where this line should go, would be in database.h. Now we've only got one .c file at the moment, so it doesn't actually matter, but it will matter when I have more than one .c file. But right now I'm actually not going to have that define in there at all, so I'll just get rid of it entirely. But if I ever choose to put it back in, I will choose to put it back into database.h.